These are the times that try men's souls. This is the opening line to the most popular work during Revolutionary America. It was written by an Englishman who immigrated to the American colonies in 1768. A man whose writings were so influential, President John Adams claimed that without his pen, the sword of Washington would have been raised in vain. But he wasn't just a propagandist, he was a true free thinker, challenging conventional wisdoms and arguing for positions way ahead of his time. Despite this, he was constantly screwed over. At his funeral, only 6 people attended. This man was Thomas Paine, and although we can learn more about him by exploring what he did for revolutionary France and America, perhaps a better question is, what would Thomas Paine do if he were alive today? The first thing Paine would probably do is take a trip up to Connecticut, to the Silas Deane House, a natural historical landmark and the former home of Silas Deane. You see, Thomas would have a bone to pick with Silas. Back in his day, Paine called out Silas as a man of no principle, a war profiteer making money off the revolution. However, Silas was defended against the accusations and led by the future first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay. The public turned on Paine. It got so bad that Paine was literally assaulted twice in the streets by Deane supporters. The whole affair became so stressful for Paine that he eventually resigned from his post as Secretary of the Committee of Foreign Affairs. The worst part about it, Paine was actually right. In time, Deane was shown to be a man of poor character and shifting allegiances. And some of Paine's biggest enemies even later admitted that he had been right. But this betrayal was nothing compared to that of his friend and idol, George Washington. Early in his career, Washington wasn't exactly a respected leader. While the public complained that Washington was an indecisive and inexperienced leader, Paine defended him and painted this portrait of a heroic figure of wisdom and principle. In The American Crisis, Paine wrote, "Posterity will call it glorious, and the name of Washington and Fabius will run parallel to eternity." Largely in part of Paine, the legend of Washington became possible, and Paine put his money where his pen was. He eventually went broke by donating the profits from the sales of his popular pamphlets to Washington's troops in the field. Washington noticed this loyalty, and later when he was president, he met with Paine once a week to produce pro-tax propaganda. It might seem out of character that Paine, a champion for individual liberty and a movement that started from a dispute on taxes on tea, would then advocate for federal taxes. But Paine was too sincere and idealistic to put his name on anything he didn't believe in, and he held all kinds of different beliefs. In fact, he argued against religion in a particularly religious period of a particularly religious country. He called out religions as human inventions set up to enslave man and monopolize power and profit. This was in the time of the Second Great Awakening, where religion was an even bigger deal in the United States than normal. But the unique ideas don't end there. If he were alive today, Paine would be a proponent of universal basic income. He'd probably join the Yang Gang, or even be Andrew Yang's running mate for the presidency. Paine made the case for UBI in his final pamphlet, Agrarian Justice. He proposed a basic universal income of £10 a year, or about $1,000 adjusted for inflation. And how did he plan to afford for this citizen's dividend? A tax on the wealthy. So maybe it wasn't so out of character for him to make pro-tax propaganda with his friend George Washington. And I think it's fair to call them friends and not just colleagues. In 1783, Washington had Paine over to his headquarters near Princeton, where the two conducted a science experiment by taking a boat out into the rocky creek and lighting a paper to see where the source of the river's strange flammability came from. Imagine those shenanigans. That doesn't exactly sound like the behavior of just colleagues. Yet years later, when Paine was locked in a French jail cell awaiting the guillotine, His friend George Washington abandoned him. Paine wrote to Washington twice, pleading for his intervention. Washington never responded. On the day of his execution, the door to his cell was marked with chalk to signal he should later be executed. However, the feverish Paine requested the door be opened in order to chill the room. By just sheer dumb luck, when the guards came later to round up the day's prisoners for execution, they did not see the chalk mark, since it was on the other side of the door. Paine was spared, and 3 days later, the revolutionary leader Maximilien Robespierre was executed, and the reign of terror had ended. Paine would not be executed. Later, James Monroe would negotiate with French authorities to have Paine freed. When he returned to the States, he publicly published a scathing letter about George Washington. In it, he labeled Washington as treacherous, that the world would be puzzled to decide whether he had abandoned good principles or whether he had ever had any. This was the equivalent of some modern-day rap diss. In fact, if he were alive today, Paine would no doubt release a diss record, maybe even auto-tuned under the rap name T-Pain. The world will be puzzled to decide whether you are an apostate or an imposter, whether you have abandoned good principles or whether you had any. It's hard to say what Paine would think about the modern day. Surely he would be proud of several things. Proud to be a part of a movement of democracy that spread across the globe. Perhaps he'd be most proud of the fact that his work is still read today. He would probably walk into a massive bookstore, marveling at the selection, picking out one of his own works from the shelf, and smile all the way up to the cashier. When the cashier rang him up and asked for his payment, he'd reach into his pocket and notice the currency. On one side, the words, "In God We Trust," and on the other, the mug of George Washington. Maybe these times would try his soul. The world will be puzzled to decide whether you are an apostate or an imposter, whether you have abandoned good principles or whether you had any.